Happy Friday, y'all. I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. So yesterday saw one of the most significant victories for American workers in years. Seattle Mayor Ed Murray announced that he'd struck a deal with city politicians, business leaders, and labor groups to raise the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour. If the measure passes City Council as expected, it will make the minimum wage in the Emerald City the highest in the entire country. Now, it's important to note that this increase will be gradual. Businesses with more than 500 employees will have 3 years to meet the wage standard, while smaller ones will have all the way up until 2021. But once in effect, the minimum wage will automatically increase 2.4% every year, regardless of the inflation rate. And this achievement would have not been possible without Seattle City Council member Shama Sawant, who has made the fight for 15 the central tenet of her time in office. 2 weeks ago, she appeared on this show to discuss why this battle is so important.
Every time the minimum wage was increased, it has been beneficial to the local economy, because when low-wage workers get a little bit of spending money in their pockets, they're going to spend it at local businesses because they don't have the money to fly off to Paris for a vacation.
See, not only do minimum wage increases improve local economies, the practice is good for the businesses themselves. Study after study has shown that increased wages lead to less job turnover and higher productivity among employees, not to mention the billions of dollars that would be saved in social service spending. In fact, a study published by the Center for American Progress found that increasing the federal minimum wage from a pathetically low $7.25 an hour to $10.10 would cut food stamp spending by $4.6 billion a year. And the growing amount of pressure on multinational corporations that refuse to pay their workers a living wage is leading to major momentum all across the country. Just this year, Connecticut, Maryland, and Hawaii all passed minimum wage increases to $10.10 an hour. So even though there's still a long way to go to ensure that every person can make a respectable living off their profession, today we can stand in solidarity with workers all across America. Now let's break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air. It's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait, do not answer that.
I want you to watch what we're about to do, because you've never seen anything like this on television.
What we need is to question more and to keep it uncensored, real and raw. My simple mission is to change the globe. I'ma do it with this passion and fire with tone. These words are hard hitting, you're watching your neck, but you need to tune in, because we're breaking the set. Breaking the set.
2 days ago, a train derailment in Lynchburg, Virginia, dumped 50,000 gallons of crude oil into the James River. The images you're seeing now are of the James River completely engulfed in flames. The massive fire prompted a partial evacuation of downtown Lynchburg and led to the shutdown of nearby roads and a bridge. About 15 train cars derailed, 3 of which caught on fire, but luckily there were no deaths or injuries. And if this disaster wasn't bad enough, an oil slick now stretches 9 miles down the river, according to a Virginia environmental office. This is the 4th accident of its kind in less than 1 year. And while there haven't been any reports of the spill directly affecting drinking water yet, the full extent of the environmental impact is yet to be seen. And get this, CSX, the same company that was responsible for the spill in Virginia, had another derailment less than 24 hours later in neighboring Maryland. But this time, the train cars were carrying 8,000 tons of coal before they went off the tracks. Great. The National Transportation Safety Board is still investigating both crashes, which clearly underscore the dangers of moving these fuels across the country by rail, as well as the poor oversight and blatant negligence when it comes to the deteriorating infrastructure of rail transport. It's no secret either, according to the federal government data. There was more oil spilled from train crashes in 2013 than in the previous 4 decades combined. Think about that for 1 second. Well over 1 million gallons of crude oil spilled from derailed train cars across the country just in 2013. Yet rail remains the #1 preferred mode of transportation for oil companies. That's not the only way oil is being moved. Hundreds of thousands of miles worth of pipelines traverse the length of the U.S., creating a massive potential for environmental and human disasters. But if you're sitting there thinking oil spills are rare, According to Lisa P. Jackson, the former EPA administrator, approximately 20,000 oil spills are reported each year to the federal government. That's 54 oil spills every single day occurring somewhere in the U.S. And wouldn't you know it, just this week, a pipeline in Alaska was punctured. Yep, and it's none other to blame than BP, my favorite corporation, to blame for covering 33 acres of some of the most pristine land in the Arctic with a, quote, oily toxic mist of chemicals. But of course, the story doesn't end there. The pipeline spill is actually the third time BP has poisoned precious Alaskan tundra and wetlands. Before this week, the corporation was responsible for a spill in 2006 and another in 2009, which spewed somewhere around 14,000 gallons of oil. Following the 2009 spill, U.S. government attorneys stated, quote, this rupture was the result of a predictable and preventable freezing of water within the pipeline that caused the pipe to overpressurize and burst. Eerily similar to the 2006 spill, BP ignored alarms that warned of the pipe's eventual rupture and leak. I'm shocked. BP ignored red flags that eventually led to a widespread disaster? It couldn't be. So, once again, it's negligence at fault for putting profit over the planet. But most importantly, it should be noted that the more we transport oil and coal by rail or pipeline, the more these accidents will continue. The more lives will be put in harm's way, and the more environmental destruction will occur. And all these disturbing stories go to show that no matter what the dirty energy lobby claims, transporting crude and coal by any method is far from safe. So even if environmental activists win the battle and prevent the Keystone XL pipeline from being built, we cannot let up in the fight against these hazardous and destructive energy sources. Because in the end, the powers that be will stop at nothing in order to transport their toxic sludge all over the world. Luckily for the corporate media, after a week of nonstop coverage of ignorant Nevada rancher Cliven Bundy, a new racist villain emerged to take over the spotlight. Donald Sterling, owner of the LA Clippers basketball team, was recorded telling his girlfriend/mistress not to publicize pictures of herself with black people nor bring them to the games, despite the fact that his team is nearly entirely made up of African Americans. Of course, his leaked comments unleashed a media firestorm, with every network from MSNBC to Fox hosting panels on race in America. And unsurprisingly, they missed the point. Yes, Donald Sterling's comments were vile. But the real issue concerning race in America is a structural problem. For example, take a look at the NBA beyond Donald Sterling's comments. According to 538, in 2013, 76.3% of NBA players were African American, compared with just 2% of the league's majority owners. In fact, Michael Jordan is the league's only black owner. Sounds like the NBA has a race problem. But alas, expecting the mainstream media to delve into the real issues of race in America, even within the NBA, would be far too complicated. Instead, we should all be shocked that yet another old white man is making ignorant comments. So joining me now to talk about some of this week's craziest stories, as well as what else the MSM missed, is attorney, nationally syndicated radio co-host of Ring of Fire, Mac Papantonio. Thank you so much for coming on.
How are you?
Amazing to have you on. So the public's outrage, and of course the media's outrage of Cliven Bundy and Donald Sterling, sure, warranted. However, they've grown to a fever pitch, and I can't help but ask, why not any feigned outrage, at least feigned, at the very least, over structural, institutionalized racism like stop and frisk in the prison industrial complex?
The media loves to talk about the idea of big ideas. I call it media ADD. I understand the Sterling story is a great example. Yesterday, the Sterling story was about racism. Today, it's about who leaked the information. It's the nature of mainstream or corporate media. And, you know, if you think about it, they have a big advantage in moving that story every day. And that's what's, imagine if they spent as much time, take CNN, for example. We've been looking for the plane. It's a terrible tragedy. But what if CNN took that same power, that same influence, and paid attention to issues as important as race? Truth is, their advertisers don't want them to do it,
right,
and so they move on from it.
Right, absolutely. And speaking of out-and-out lunatics, I guess I shouldn't even be surprised at this, but I wanted to play our audience a clip from Sarah Palin getting her thoughts at the NRA's Stand and Fight rally. Let's check it out.
If I were in charge, they would know that waterboarding is how we baptize terrorists.
I mean, what's most amazing is that after making these comments, her own evangelical base was so upset for besmirching that sacred rite of baptism. What the hell were her motivations, or should I even be asking that about someone like Sarah Palin?
Crazy is an industry. Understand, Sarah Palin makes a lot of money absolutely going after this small fringe of crazy, just like Rush does and Beck does. All of them become millionaires by playing that crazy card. And they've got it down to real science. She knows she can do certain things and get away with it. The baptism thing, that'll be forgotten tomorrow. They'll still buy her books. They'll still show up for her speeches because crazy is a big industry in America right now.
You're absolutely right, and only in America could you see someone like that even being considered a legitimate politician, getting to the point where she could actually be the Vice President of the United States. Unbelievable, Mike. On a more serious note, you've been covering a lot on your show. Rising CEO pay. This is very disturbing. For the first time in history, the 10 highest paid U.S. CEOs took home more than $100 million in compensation. Inequality is the highest in America, growing faster in America than any other country. How did we get to this point?
You talk on your show a good bit about the notion of colonialism. That is what's happened in the United States is we've become one of those colonial nations. We used to go overseas and we would go to Africa and South America and we would build colonies in those places, extract from those places. Now what's happening, Abby, it's happening right here in the United States. We are now that new target, and we're so naive about what's happening, we don't even recognize that these multinational corporations are coming like locusts here, and they want to pay their people big money. They want to pay them more than they make in Europe and Asia. So to become a colonial nation, you have to pay the people that are making that happen, and that's what's happening to us. We want to think we're above all that. We want to think that's something we did to somebody else. But now, if you can imagine, it's just like locusts moving around the planet right now. Right now, the corporate locusts are right here, and they're calling the shots.
Right. Where can they get the best tax havens? Where can they exploit workers the best? And here in America, it's a pretty good deal for corporate CEOs. Mike, speaking of ridiculous salaries, as an attorney, you said something very important. And I want to repeat that for our audience. 70% of kids coming out of law school want to represent corporations and get paid an exorbitant amount of money to do so. They're willing to sell their souls to the highest bidder. How do we convince those people in law school to abide by their conscience like you did?
It's become a need-to-know profession. It used to be when you were coming through the humanities, you were coming through whatever the course, whether it's political science, you had to think about things like important ideas. I remember the person that convinced me most to go to law school was probably one of the best trial lawyers in America, probably since Clarence Darrow. And I met him in his house. I said, Mr. Nichols, what do you think distinguished you as a great lawyer? He had books behind him, Steinbeck, Conrad, Kafka, you name it, all the great works were right there. He says, you know what? There are no great ideas there. These aren't my ideas. My ideas are not the great ideas. They're all in those books, and I've borrowed them. And what he also said is that made me into the person I am. That shaped me. When I read Steinbeck's Grapes of Wrath, that shaped who I am. And so I don't think with a need-to-know kind of education, you simply don't get that.
Right, and now, how do you feel about GW now introducing lobbying as a major, where all the young Karl Roves in D.C. can just streamline their careers and go straight to the lobbying industry?
That's exactly what's happening. But to get there, Abby, you have to have the same kind of education that you had or that I had. You have to have parents that paid attention to you and said, listen, these ideas are important. This is what you ought to be thinking about. But when you're taking FCATs and you're taking SATs and you're taking LSATs, and all you have to know is need-to-know information. You don't have to think about big ideas. You don't have to wonder why in the hell John Steinbeck wrote like he did, that people are oppressed and we should do something about it. And unfortunately, in law school, you know, that's just not out there. The number of trial lawyers that really pay attention to this is dwindling.
Oh, so unfortunate. Thank you so much, Mike Papantonio, attorney, co-host, Ring of Fire. Amazing to have you on. Really appreciate it.
Thank you, Abby.
Coming up, you guys, I'll have an exclusive interview with two guys who are crashing meetings with top lobbyists and contractors and getting away with it. Stick around.
What are your thoughts on what's been going on in Washington?
Well, it's a mess, Larry. I mean, the whole country is being scoffed at and laughed at.
Enough is enough.
The media, the candidates, the corporatocracy, covering issues that actually affect you and me doesn't do too much for ad revenue.
Biotech agriculture giant takes on a 76-year-old American farmer based in Indiana.
How much fallout do you think this is going to create for the CIA?
Do you think this is what's triggering the crisis?
America's the largest economy in the world. It's also the largest debtor nation in the history of the world.
Breaking the Set is mostly about alternatives to the status quo, but one that gave real alternatives a voice.
One minute they were working toward the American dream, the next they were just trying to survive the night. It's time for Americans and lawmakers in Washington to wake up and start talking about the real causes of poverty in America.
Can you imagine if someone from the Department of Energy made an announcement that by the year 2030, the U.S. would be 100% dependent on renewable energy? And not only that, but partner with Native American nations to supply the sources? Well, believe it or not, this actually happened. But if it sounds too good to be true, that's probably because it is. See, this was just the latest elaborate prank orchestrated by the activist group, the Yes Men.
On behalf of the Department of Energy, I'm very excited to announce today a great new plan. It's beginning a process that will do nothing less than convert the United States energy grid into one that's powered entirely by renewable sources. By 2030, America will produce 100% of our energy from renewables, establishing us once again as a beacon of innovation and progress and as a global leader in confronting the supreme challenge of climate change.
Yes, at a meeting of the Homeland Security Congress, dozens of military contractors and lobbyists were hoodwinked into believing a fictitious new government plan called the American Renewable Clean Energy Network. Benedict Waterman, the man you just saw speaking, was actually Andy Bickelbaum of the Yes Men. And his talk was followed up by another impassioned speech from someone calling themselves Bana Slowhorse of the Bureau of Indian Affairs, who was actually Gets Crazy Boy, an indigenous tar sands activist. Following these talks, Crazy Boy passed out native headbands, led the attendees of the conference into a celebratory circle dance. But if the dance wasn't hilarious enough, the contractors then lined up to gush about how excited they were about the conversion into renewables.
So one of the sponsors also, we're part of Northrop Grumman. We're a large business, but very interested to see how we can support this novel cause.
That's fantastic. So excited.
Yeah, this is outstanding. I feel really good. It's a very emotional day.
Great.
Yes, that was a contractor from Northrop Grumman expressing his extreme enthusiasm for the project. But this type of stunt fits in the common tactics the Yes Men use to draw attention to political issues and social injustices. They operate under the mission statement that lies can expose truth. The Yes Men have done everything from impersonate Halliburton to the World Trade Organization, and I'm very happy to have Mike Bonanno of the Yes Men and Gets Crazy Boy join me now from New York. Amazing to have you both on.
Thank you very much.
Glad to be on.
So, Mike, I want to start by asking you, what the hell was this meeting all about, and were you surprised that someone from Northrop Grumman supported your plan for renewable energy?
Well, this meeting is like many that bring together government and defense contractors to try to create corporate welfare to support the defense industry. It's crazy. It's a place where defense contractors simply try to get money. And the idea is that this is somehow involved in our security. You know, homeland security is the topic. But in reality, it's anything but concerned with our security, because if we were actually concerned about our security, we'd be dealing with things like climate change and dealing with it proactively, not doing what they're doing, which is simply trying to peddle weapons.
Right, yeah, I mean, that's why I was surprised, I guess, to see someone from Northrop Grumman acting so excited. I mean, you weren't talking about weapons, you're talking about renewables.
Well, you know, surprisingly enough, most people are not megalomaniacally insane. Even people that work for Northrop Grumman. And if they're given the opportunity to do what they actually believe in their hearts is the right thing, they go with it. It's just a few oil industry lobbyists that actually think that it's a good idea. I mean, it's not even the lobbyists, it's the oil industry that's pushing our governments to prevent us from doing what we need to do to deal with this crisis. And that is a really big crime.
Well said, well said. Without giving away any of your personal tactics, Andy impersonated someone from the Department of Energy. You claim to be from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. How did you convince people that you're actually government officials?
It's not too hard. I mean, like, there's this weird romanticized view that America has on Native people. So you throw a hat on or a feather, and next thing you know, you're spending like $10,000 in Arizona for some shaman to teach you how to be a native. So it wasn't really too hard to fool some people into believing I was part of the BIA.
Oh my gosh, it's amazing. Mike, why did you choose to draw attention to renewable energy with this stunt, and how attainable would the plan you proposed actually be?
Well, the plan that it was proposed is actually based on real plans. And there's an article in Scientific American very recently that outlined converting to renewables in 13 years. There are other plans that are out there, many other plans, and actually 2030 is not that ambitious a number. There are entire countries right now that are on target to convert by 2020, and of course, even some very large industrialized countries are on target for 2030. So it wouldn't be that crazy for the United States to say, we've done really big things before. We could do something this big now.
Right. Gitz, considering the fact that indigenous communities have been virtually ignored by pretty much every government and that treaties have been violated for years, what was your reaction to people actually believing that this partnership was real? I mean, how out of touch are these people?
I don't know if it's really out of touch, but I mean, if you give people if you allow people to dream,
yeah,
what can come from that if they have action behind it? What could you do if you give the incentive to people that there is a better way? And we all know that we're barreling down this road of loss of species, climate change, big catastrophic events. The weather patterns we're having right here, no one can say for sure if they're going to be New America's pastime or if they're just going to be something that's just quickly passing. But what was important for us was just to help them realize this dream. They have the ambition. They really actually want a beautiful, healthy change for all of us.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's important to humanize these people and realize that no one's innately bad. I mean, if the political establishment basically said, we do want to do this, I'm sure everyone would jump on board and say, great, let's save the planet. Mike, I want to go back and talk about some of the other things the Yes Man has done. Let's take a look at Andy Bickelbaum posing as a spokesperson for Dow Chemicals on the BBC on the anniversary of the Bhopal chemical disaster.
It's 20 years since the disaster, and today I'm very happy to announce that for the first time Dow is accepting full responsibility for the Bhopal catastrophe. We have a $12 billion plan to finally, at long last, fully compensate the victims, including the 120,000 who may need medical care for their entire lives. And to fully...
that would have been a Howard Beale moment if only it were true, and it was at the time. What prompted the Yes Men to take on Dow specifically?
Well, Dow had created the largest industrial accident in history. Actually, it was Union Carbide, but Union Carbide acquired Dow. And when they acquired Dow, many people argued that they acquired their liabilities as well as their assets. But Dow claimed that in India, they didn't get any of their liabilities, that the liabilities had been settled by Union Carbide, despite the fact that there were hundreds of thousands of people who had never gotten adequate compensation. And the Bhopal plant site, the site of the largest industrial accident in history, had never been cleaned up. It hadn't been remediated, and now there was a second wave, another generation of children that were getting sick because of the water contamination on that site. And so we did it because we were asked actually by activists there and at Greenpeace to do something about that, to try to get people to realize that it was Dow that was now responsible for that legacy.
Gitz, the Yes Men constantly targets groups that favor profit over people, pranking TPP negotiations, the World Trade Organization's meeting. Why go after these groups?
They have some plan. They have some hand in playing all this. There's some influence. It also allows us opportunities like this to be sitting here in front of you to talk to you about the massive devastation that's happening in northern Alberta with the tar sands extraction and development, the industrial development up there. It allows us to say something like the Wet'suwet'ens, who are camping out right now, that are living right now in the heart of the Enbridge pipeline, proposed Enbridge pipeline, that are adamant about not moving, that is their homeland, willing to defend. It allows us the ability to voice these things. You know, to do an action like that or a stunt and to grab some of that attention and actually redirect it in a really positive way is super important. I believe that's why, you know, we do these things.
Absolutely. Mike, why does the TPP need the help of the yes men to be exposed?
Well, the TPP is one of these crazy bureaucratic proposals that in the end is designed to privilege profit over everything else. We got to start fighting the World Trade Organization policies, these neoliberal policies that were being applied religiously across the board, no matter what impact they had on people on the ground. And we started out attacking that, and we continue to attack trade policies, these bureaucratic things that are very hard to understand for a layperson, but that if you look at them, are very dangerous and damaging to people and the environment.
Absolutely. 600 plus corporate advisors, negotiations constantly in secret. I'm really happy you guys did that stunt, shedding some light on this. I wanted to take a look at probably the most absurd stunt from the Yes Men. I don't think we have time to actually play this clip, but the Halliburton survival ball, I just heard that we do have time. Let's check it out.
This is the answer. This is the Halliburton survival ball. It's 3 easy steps for deployment: suiting up, inflating, and of course, launching. Launching out of a building, and we have an artist's rendition of what it might be like in Houston when we launched our survival balls.
Mike, I want a double question here. What was the message you were trying to convey with the creation of the ball? And I think people are so frustrated. What advice do you give to people who want to disrupt the corporatocracy? We have about a minute left.
Well, the survival ball is about the absurdity of this system that we're living in and of the idea that we can survive climate change by simply fortifying our borders or creating these little bubbles that we can live in. We cannot escape this thing. We are in it together, and we have to deal with it together. And people like Gitz, who come from ground zero, the tar sands, his whole land and culture are being destroyed by this industry. And they know and they understand, and it hasn't hit us as strong yet, but it will soon. And that's what this is all about. It's all about talking about that and approaching it in a way that's funny and engaging.
Absolutely, you guys. Thank you so much. Mike Bonano, Gitz Crazy Boy from the Yes Men. Amazing to have you guys on. That's our show, you guys. Have a great weekend. Join me again next week when I break the set all over again. Happy Friday, y'all. I'm Abby Martin, and this is Breaking the Set. So yesterday saw one of the most significant victories for American workers in years. Seattle Mayor Ed Murray announced that he'd struck a deal with city politicians, business leaders, and labor groups to raise the city's minimum wage to $15 an hour. If the measure passes City Council as expected, it will make the minimum wage in the Emerald City the highest in the entire country. Now, it's important to note that this increase will be gradual. Businesses with more than 500 employees will have all across the country. Just this year, Connecticut, Maryland, and Hawaii all passed minimum wage increases to $10.10 an hour. So even though there's still a long way to go to ensure that every person can make a respectable living off their profession, today we can stand in solidarity with workers all across America. Now let's break the set.
It was a terrible mistake, and we're working very hard to make up for it.
And once again, we put something on the air that's a flat-out lie.
Have you ever had sex with Governor Rick Perry?
No, wait. I don't have the money to fly off to Paris for a vacation.
See, not only do minimum wage increases improve local economies, the practice is good for the businesses themselves. Study after study has shown that increased wages lead to less job turnover and higher productivity among employees, not to mention the billions of dollars that would be saved in social service spending. In fact, a study published by the Center for American Progress found that increasing the federal minimum wage from a pathetically low $7.25 an hour to $10.10 would cut food stamp spending by $4.6 billion a year. And the growing amount of pressure on multinational corporations that refuse to pay their workers a living wage is leading to major momentum.
I want you to watch what we're about to do because you've never seen anything like this on television.
2 days ago, a train derailment in Lynchburg, Virginia, dumped 50,000 gallons of crude oil into the James River. The images you're seeing now have 3 years to meet the wage standard, while smaller ones will have all the way up until 2021. But once in effect, the minimum wage will automatically increase 2.4% every year, regardless of the inflation rate. And this achievement would have not been possible without Seattle City Council member Shama Sawant, who has made the fight for 15 the central tenet of her time in office. 2 weeks ago, she appeared on this show to discuss why this battle is so important.
Every time the minimum wage was increased, it has been beneficial to the local economy, because when low-wage workers get a little bit of spending money in their pockets, they're going to spend it at local businesses because they don't